Can you hear me?
Yeah, we are live, by the way. So
All right, awesome. So I was at my friend's house today, and basically we were just talking about gynocracy and female order and female power. Now I say order in a weird way because like I really don't mean it as in everyone has a place. Dad goes to work, mom stays at home. It's more like female supremacy, as goofy as that sounds. In our words, my friend was talking about like how really men are under the illusion that we're in control when really there's too much power given to women, where the liberal democratic capitalist market, whatever you want to call it, is more likely to discriminate and hire women more than men. And the jobs they get are something that like every handicapped man could get, being, say, a librarian, a janitor, not just a janitor, like a librarian, a front desk computer tech guy, anything that offers front desk. These jobs that make as much as like somebody putting boxes in a UPS truck, but more. But they deliberately biasly give it to women, aka pink collar work. And me and my friend were just talking about how the economy in the last 30 years has been meticulously planned out this way. So like these women would call the shots over men. They would choose the reverse, trophy husbands. Trophy husbands then stay at home, do nothing, biased because they're white males. And the weirdest part of it all is that this is basically a pseudo social Darwinian program. So none of these men could actually be like, say, like Andrew Tate and not be controlled by any women and go out and actually change things. Because if you want the power structure to be obnoxiously liberal and the same, all you have to do is get rid of men and any bondship over men. So what you do is basically you enforce like the hatred of men, saying, if there's male bondship, you're gay. That means if you're gay, then that's weird. You're pedophiles or something like that. Basically, right. They do these tactics to like pseudo tactics to make other men hate each other. And then like they say that if men are in control, then they think of women as they're fighting over women, right? So it's like women knowing this. Here's the funny part. Women know this. So then they like use themselves to let other men fight for them, which they get aroused by. So it's not men fighting each other. It's women telling men to kill each other. And really it should be men bonding and then distributing with it. So it's like all these nitpick things. It's like not Andrew Tate at all whatsoever. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and honestly, like, it's really hard for me on these kind of things to like know where to begin because there's so many different aspects to it. But one place, like I was watching Star Trek, the really old one, like the '60s or '70s, whichever, I don't know. But the older one was Kirk and Spock and all that. And there's like, this is really interesting to watch, like the different thing. Like obviously, the people who write these shows and all this, like, they have some sort of fundamental psychological, religious, evolutionary psychology, old wives' tale, whatever you want to say. They have these different tropes that they're definitely putting in there. Now, whether it's reality or not is a different thing. But it's like, it shows women pitting, Kirk against another man, saying, he's seducing me, but actually I'm just seducing him, and it's like, it's like a weird thing, and it just shows you like these things are not new at all. It's like definitely this is a very long project, at least a couple hundred years for sure.
The point being is that a lot of the traditional boomer values of like men being in charge is like a falsified myth, and in actual reality, it's like all this is planned to like tear down men, because if men were truly themselves and they didn't let women and their soft emotions tell them they have to stay at home, then men would be outside actually changing the system. So the best way to keep men afoot is to give them women. But the catch is not women they control like a harem, but women who are girl bosses, go to work, stay at home men in return, and they're told this is the 21st century, husband-wife duo. In other words, men stay at home, they're in front of the computer typing, and then women are the ones that the jobs men are supposed to do. And so it's pretty much planned that way, so men don't have a word don't have a say and don't have control. And then in addition, they fight. It's men killing each other, because if men were to ever get together and have their own social cohesion group, then they would control the women and take back all the jobs again. And so me and my friend were talking about that, because it was just pretty obvious where we have all similar simulations in the 2020s or in the last 10 years, where it feels like most women, there's a fallacy where guys feel like they earned their woman through dating. Like they found this woman on Tinder and OkCupid, but like OkCupid and Tinder is like made for women power. It's a female centric platform. And if women choose you like a shitty Hawkins dance, then it's like, the man doesn't win, the woman.
Well, what's funny is someone who didn't find a mate that way, although I did participate in it, it definitely is
Can you hear me?
still true, and I think it's, well, two things I want to start with, which is
I can't hear you. Ruh-roh.
Can you hear me?
You're back on. Yeah, I can hear you. Continue.
Okay, sorry, I don't know what happened, but yeah. So go ahead. But I'll save it for a second. While I'm
just me and my friend, who I've known for like 8 years now, and kind of like college age friends. He went through a lot of similar stuff I've been going through. His situation is like he's with his wife, but like his wife has more power than him and a little older than him too, and she makes the money, and he's just kind of just a trophy husband by legit definition. Now, I'm not saying it's like trophy wife, trophy husband are the same class. It's very peculiarly different. Like there's no such thing as like trophy husbands until the last 20 years. And it's, right. I'm saying that we were both saying this was pretty much planned out, because if either of us had power, or he would have a situation where he's going out, the woman would be obedient, wouldn't get offended over his right to say things, right, and just be a liberal individual. But I think, and what we're thinking, is that perhaps in America, the liberal society has made it gynocratic because it's the best way to enforce liberalism, is to make sure no anti-liberalism is to confront. And so it's just like, it's more than Andrew Tate bullshit, where Andrew Tate is saying, no, Andrew Tate means good at all. Like, he's saying praxis and internal truths, but it's like Andrew Tate is only wrong on the level where it's like it doesn't help the current situation. It just reinforces gynocratic values.
Well, yeah, no, and it puts it on a thing. And so I'll say a couple little, framings that I like. First of all, like the Alex Jones British Empire slavery analogy used to talk about first you get the women to be in control of the family, and then that puts men out of power. Therefore, that's why they usually had a mama. The Uncle Tom was actually usually a female. Let's just put it that way. If that makes sense, right? And I think that they've definitely weaponized that against everyone. And again, it doesn't mean that women are incapable or whatever, but women's natural instincts have been essentially turned into a weaponized thing, and so have men's, of course. But and the other thing, I'm trying to remember the exact thing I was going to say about. But you talked about like women being trained into like agents via like the dating apps and stuff like that, where they're kind of like all like a weird Stasi or something like that, where they're just kind of like always taking account of like, are you
so if you say anything if you say anything politically bad, your woman could use it as like a reason to just leave you out of nowhere, which might even be the most absurdist thing. And that's the problem, is that it's a man's anxiety. Right. Like, it should be the man in control, and the woman doesn't matter what the guy says. But we live in a peculiar society that even if you believe in one thing, like my favorite color is blue, that's now a political offense, and the woman could leave you. And then the divorce court goes with it. And so it's like really dysfunctional, where a lot of it is two different sides of the story, where women have been told that they have all the power, and men are told they're in control of these women, but they're actually not. It's both illusions on two different sides.
And there's another specific thing I was thinking of, but definitely the thing about I think here it is. So you know how we've been in all these proxy wars for probably forever, but I would say that the real gender war is actually like a proxy war between the ruling class and general, at least Western European white society. I mean, to say the least, right? I'm sure it applies to everyone else as well, but it's definitely like the proxy war is at home between men and women. That's the proxy war between the ruling class and the other men, essentially.
I mean, it goes through a lot of levels. Like we were talking about, like race is one level, but then I wouldn't say gender. I'd say biological difference between men and women is the second, where basically men and women are very different and they're not the same. And as long with the racial ideal, it's very much there's not only different types of women, black women, Asian women, Indian women, but there's also different types of men, black men, Mexican, and like these two temperaments between patriarchy, matriarchy, racial difference, and the political habitat of where they exist is all in there. And it's kind of like the animal core of who we are in a natural state. It's kind of like liberalism is trying to overcome that with this universal ideal that's we're all just individuals. And yeah, it's funny because me and my friend we're big sci-fi geeks, so we get into transhumanism and say there's like high tech behind this, but the point in being is that the tech's not really there, and at the end of the day we're just in a colonization process where just to reiterate, most men are depressed today because they really don't have any control or power. Rather, they're just playing this bizarre pseudo white collar game of let the woman have the platform first. She makes the money. You stay at home and kill yourself out of anything you could possibly do. And even if you were to do something more, they will stop you.
Yeah, and this is kind of a personal thing that you and I have experienced, and obviously your friend and many other people I know have experienced. So it's like I'm trying to put it in terms that's not personal, but it's kind of hard because it's one of these things where to the people who haven't been through this, it's not going to really make sense, I think, because they haven't personally experienced it. They're going to have some sort of other perspective of saying, well, maybe it's this or maybe it's that. It can't be what these guys are saying, but
because here's the thing, most of the guys that are, I mean, this is absurd. I mean, MGTOW is now like a 15-year-old concept, but the whole point of MRA, men's rights activism, and MGTOW, it comes from jaded men who did everything to follow the post-boomer ideal of Puritan ethics in the white American society, but it's like backfiring so bad that you had to make like 15 years plus of information to fight against this tide of men having control back and not women. But the problem is, what was once Jack Donovan 10 years ago, now we have Andrew Tate for the mainstream masses. But then Andrew Tate might say truthful things, but Tate is just the remedy. The antidote is pretty much, no, gynocracy can't be defeated. You just treat women like bitches and move on. But it's like, well, that's not the point, because that just creates a dysfunctional African society that destroys everything what the boomers did when they were in control.
And I think the truth is, like, one thing that kind of occurred to me, and I wish I could remember the specific instance of what I was thinking of, but usually by the time someone like a Tate is commenting on something, it's because it's already, at least in the ruling class's minds, it's already a foregone conclusion that this is the direction that we're going in. And I think that that's where people get confused, like you're saying, there's a culture war, or there's something like that, right? Well, the point is, the culture wars by the time the average person gets wind of this, we're 20 years down the line at least, right? So now we're having a debate about something that's already been decided, essentially, right? And I think that's the real psyop.
Okay, basically, Paul Fussell, American professor, he said this pretty much rightly in his book on class. He said that, quote unquote, the culture war is pretty much the right kind of white people weeding out the wrong kind of white people. It's a Eurocentric bias thing. Like, that's the whole point. It's already been decided. There was no, once upon a time everything was fine until the culture war. That's a goofy misconception, just like postmodernity, because it's not anti-modernity. It's just, how can we enforce liberalism? It's like the argument was already started before it began. And now with, 70 years since the culture war thing. It's not this internal reality. It's something that happened through modernity, and it was just whites deciding and divvying up who are the right kind of white men and who are the wrong, and then annihilating them and divvying out the poker chips. And that's the problem, is that X has, I was talking this to my friend too, how a lot of it is psychological warfare, a lot of it is astroturf. There's no grassroots things. A lot of it is bots and agents. And what's happening is they're getting your actual legitimate anger against liberalism, a sincere anti-liberal conviction, but then fueling it back into the system by a billionaire, Elon Musk, who could care less what you really think, and then making sure in the next 4 years all those potential Trump voters are going to vote for the quote-unquote base Democrat. And so you can really change people's minds all through an echo chamber, while people believe they're actually pushing and changing things, because these are already planned out in the offices of San Francisco or Washington, D.C. We're just not allowed to know what's happening on the front.
Right. Well, and again, I think this is where Machine Lies. Hopefully he'll be watching this soon. But like, I think that's where his ideas come into play for me, especially, is like, it's the idea that, mechanos, or the things, the how of which we do things kind of owns you, right? Like, the way we go about and live our lives, we're kind of like, generally speaking, there's not a lot of options outside of, okay, you kind of grow up with your parents maybe for like 4 or 5 years, and then you're pretty much shuttled off to school. That's a relatively new thing in,
here's the thing: the ideal that the son or the daughter, or especially the son, was to leave what they call the parents' nest, and at the magical age of 18, they got life figured out. Here's a house, here's a wife. That's the problem, is that used to make sense when you had post scarcity and everything was waiting there for you. Now, in an unpredictable society where all liberalism is by you, the things are not there anymore, and it's becoming highly irrational to throw your son or daughter out in the wilderness because they will die. And a lot of boomer parents and Gen Xers do not understand that, and now we're seeing the repercussions of this extreme guilt liberalism.
And to be fair, like, it's not impossible to see why these people couldn't see the danger lurking around the corner, right? I mean, and again, depends on how far you want to go back and, quantify and qualify what we're talking about. But definitely, I would say that, like,
many people above the age of 60 still believe liberalism is correct, and that their sons and children are autonomous individuals that they don't have to take responsibility for, which is kind of a pseudo precursor to transhumanist autonomy in a weird way, if you think about it. And the point is, they say that the millennial generation is a quote-unquote snowflake generation, or the boomerang generation. They like to say, they're coming back to the parents' nest. All of this is very degrading and insultive towards people's, it's not our fault we were born at this time, and it's not a choice we made. It's as if they are telling the people in power that liberalism cannot be upheld anymore, and only this class can uphold it, and you should feel guilt if you don't act like a liberal. And it's only in America where they're telling you, that you should feel guilty to live with your parents, because certainly they don't do that in Mexico, the Philippines, Southeast Asia,
anywhere in the world, they don't. I mean,
it's normal. And then one more thing to say. It's so crazy that, housing in South San Francisco, which was once all white neighborhoods, are now owned by South American and Mexicans who use these houses as multi-generational places. So grandma lives there, grandpa and dad lives there. And guess what? If they were to sell these houses, they would be 1.2 million because it's in the Bay Area. So it's highly irrational to move out.
And what it shows you is, like, these people wouldn't even do that. They wouldn't even sell the house that they intergenerationally bought for $100,000 for 1.2 million, because the value of living here with 15 people on a house that's paid off or on the way to being paid off because you have 15 people in it, they'd rather be here taxing the infrastructure and the resources, because it's more valuable to have access to our culture and our way of life than it is to go and take that money back to where they came from, right? Now, and again, I'm not even judging them. I'm just saying, like, that's very interesting, right? Like, it kind of shows you, like, there was something there obviously of high value, and now it's being said, well, this is bad, we need to, like, basically weigh it down until it collapses.
That psyop is working against whites. It's like white people have created their own psyop where they are upholding liberalism to a point where they have to kill themselves where people who are not white are benefiting from that psyop, while those non-whites are also being psyoped to reinforce it back onto the whites, and so everybody is in their own prison system.
But under the guise that they're actually changing it or making it their own or whatever. And it's funny, like I sent you that video of the guy who went, who was living in Colombia and married a Colombian girl, and some guy who supposedly her godfather is like, you fuck with my daughter, I'll kill you. I have her password to everything. That's a weird sexual thing, obviously, right? But he's
Right.
like, I can't believe that they would do all this. It's like, yeah, because the rest of the world doesn't care about your way of life or your language or your culture. He's like, well, I learned their language, they didn't learn mine, so they didn't even interest in me. It's like, yeah, welcome to the rest of the world where you
Right.
don't have an identity. You are your clan, you are your whatever. I mean,
Right. And so this is the whole thing with where this is the problem. White nationalists seem to get this, and yet at the same time, this is why X is so powerful, is that it can psyop white nationalism into reinforcing liberalism back at them. So white nationalism could
Exactly.
offer anti-liberalism, but then you see memes like pseudo agent accounts like Canadian Patriot who are not allowed to see who's behind it. He's writing memes going against libertarians, saying, libertarians say, keep your hands off my stuff. Well, you know what nationalists say? Keep my hands off my people. Now that's a partial truth to it, but both libertarian and nationalists, they just believe in the same thing, the ideal of property. Libertarians call it stuff. Nationalists call it people. They think Canadian Patriot thinks nationalist is more important because people have a higher value. However, both of them have the argument of proprietarianism. In other words, you need property. But that's
Right.
the problem, is that we're already in a liberal, democratic, capitalist society that believes liberals need to have property in order to function. So
Well,
it doesn't really solve a idealist view of the world where you're sacrificing yourself for the clan or your race. It's you only like it because I like the aesthetics, and that still is being white nationalists are being psyoped back into boomer liberalism.
yeah, and it's kind of like this weird fantasy simulacrum or whatever you want to call it. Like, I want to cosplay as XYZ, regardless of the results. I have the right to cosplay, and it's like, it's kind of like it's like these people took Plato and they're like, we're going to cosplay as if we're living in a Platonic society. But the reality is, it's just that it's a cosplay that it's not actually focused on justice or beauty or anything.
Literally, 8-9 years ago at Rosemont College, where Plato was being told by the all women, nerdy guy class, and all the white women and white guys were thinking, to be a liberal means to uphold Socrates and Plato. And that has something to do with Trader Joe's, trans people are good, and black people. And it's just so absurd where this is just a Eurocentric fantasy like Harry Potter. If only things were good if we never left university. And then, and not that I'm going to sound like PragerU here. It's like once you leave college, that isn't the case, right? And
and now they have the right wing version of that too. So now they have like the right wing woke
so
version.
I'm telling you, the only way you can upheld that like Plato fantasy is if you had right after college got a managerial job with other white people ruling over non-whites, and this is usually done by weirdo Christians, Lake Tahoe people,
Exactly.
the deluded white who vote for Biden, the blues. That's the whole purpose. Massachusetts to New York, you go to Vassar College, take your 4 years in Plato, and then here's an internship that exploits black people in debt collecting while you get to live your all white staff. So it's a very Eurocentric fallacy because it's not the real world. It's Martha's Vineyard. And so I guess I just told you, Christian Landers stuff white people like there. But the problem is, like, they've been trying to extend this Plato fantasy to like brown people. You had like Jewish, leaders like Harold Bloom that would say, what made Plato great is that he was for all people. It wasn't just white people. White people are so good because a Jew and a black and an African or whatever can become egalitarian, meritocratic intellects all peacefully talking together, and that's liberalism. And then like that's just the LARP fantasy, the cosplay you're talking about. It's a big psyop. So you don't understand the reality race, the difference between men and women, and there's this bizarre philosopher king's association with managerial capitalism.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of how I was going to contextualize it, but it's back to the gynocracy angle of this whole thing is like, definitely women have the sense that they're in control, but the reality is they've been kind of unleashed to wreak havoc. So the control that they have, while it's real in some senses, it's also an illusion in order to feed the ego, just as the way it's been done to men as well. And so essentially this has kind of caused like this thing where you can't actually get a grip on anything real, grabbing the levers of power.
Well, women are more, they did brain scans between men and women. This is kind of another biological reality. Men tend to think all parts of the brain, so we're willing to think of the past, the future, learn things. Well, when they looked at the mind activity of women, it was their frontal cortex, which is more emotions. And so there's like physical evidence that women tend to think more emotionally. And if all you do is you think more in your frontal cortex, you tend to believe in narcissism. In other words, only you exist. And it's this kind of women solipsism where the world is about you. You're biologically dependent. You're the supply. You have a vagina. Men have penises which penetrate you. And so you're not going to penetrate anyone. You're just going to tell people what to do. So to celebrate women is not to celebrate, smart people like men do. It's more like to cause havoc where you have a bunch of supply with no demand, and that just kills the resources and toxins the crops. And it pretty much, it's not men hurting women, it's women hurting themselves and men trying to help them. And that's the situation we're in.
Well, and again, it's just put into a situation where there's really no way to heal it. And I want to give my my friend Unseen a shout out, because I kind of talked to him about some of these issues about control, and it wasn't exactly related to this, but he said something to the effect of like, as a Christian, you need to think about how do you approach things as a Christian? You can't go and expect that you're going to have a worldly thing to these spiritual problems. And I do think that we're kind of bordering on spiritual problems here, but it really is one of these things where like there's not going to be like a panacea pill to fix all these problems, and I do agree with him in some sense, but definitely it's like one of these situations where this hole that we're in between the sexes, it's like, I mean, I don't think people, even the most black-pilled person definitely doesn't seem to grasp how deep this really, I mean, I think men who've been married in the modern times, and especially try to start a family and do all these different things, I think that seeing the divorce as like a failure of men or women or society kind of also just misses that it's a symptom of a much deeper, landscape that we're trying to participate in. I mean, there's no real way out of what we're in, and it's definitely a situation of triage.
What happened is, a lot of people have to understand, and this isn't like, say, an accelerationist point of view, but there is legitimate truth to the fact that it's beyond our control, right? That doesn't mean you have to be an accelerationist. You just have to admit to a simple truth that you don't have basic property rights. The state has controlled everything. You are in an experiment where they've already decided your life before you were born. Now, that shouldn't cause schizophrenic paranoia or some Philip K. Dick reality, but it gives us enlightenment to the fact that it can open up to other, Eastern ideals of how the world should work. We know that anti-liberalism is an inherent good, and anti-liberalism is pretty much the critical persuasion that the other half of the world already believes in, BRICS. It's only the G7 manifestation believes in liberalism, and again, it's not about money, it's the power and values and message that they're trying to get across, because if you have so much money, it's about telling the rest of the world women can be like men, black women can date white men, and everybody can be half white, and you don't have to be bound down to animalistic things, and that's basically, something that Darwin argues, where humanity, if they have certain trends and habits, they would de-evolve into something else. In other words, if we don't use our front teeth to, bite large animals, then we'll lose those teeth. And that's the problem, is that if we develop a few generations in through, evolutionary psychology, we might lose muscle in the future because we don't have any purpose for our muscle anymore. And so that we become kind of like mole rat people of sorts. And so that just leaves us with that, the idea that genetics are real.
Well, and I was just kind of thinking, in my, I don't want to say in depressed state, but, in a recent situation that I was in, kind of lamented on the fact of like, is it worth preserving what it means to be a Scottish person or a white Anglo person? Like, what is the fact that we're just brutal people that would abandon our people or our kids if we had to feed our other kids, or we had to go to war and just enjoy slaughtering each other because that's just how we had to survive. Like, maybe that's what they're really trying to do, is just get rid of the violence, and they've kind of figured out a certain angle in which they're going to do that, which is liberalism or something, right?
But to talk about whiteness for a second, there was at one point in time, a Frenchman was a Frenchman, a Croat was a Croat, right? And it wasn't until the 20th century where they were all mixing together, and they just said this new egalitarian form that we're all white, Estonian and Russian, Romanian and Moldovan. We shouldn't be fighting over these frivolous differences. I call these real other racial groups. Instead, those are ethnicities, and we're all just white. We can now call Germans white, and there's a problem with that. It's because they're no longer German; they're now just white, and that gives power to say, against Africans, where now if they're all just black, there's one universal blackness. Or like to call a Chinese, Korean, Japanese, or a Thai person an Asian, it doesn't do justice because it denies Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Thai backgrounds. And so the only people that really fell for it were the very people, European people,
that actually value justice, ironically.
Right, that's the irony. So the very racial group, admixture, or just European people in general, who made up liberalism, who had high trust values in society, who believed you're more than your body and there's a soul from Christian ethics, they're the ones that are telling the rest of the world that they should frown upon these racial backgrounds and be an individual for the admixture European Borg. But most people are not buying that, and that's what rose to equity. In other words, if you are, a bitchy Chinese woman who, believes in feminism doesn't make women equal. It just means give me the white men, or if you're a black woman from Africa, you have no chance in the white guy dating market, you bitch and cry and you get free welfare because of oppression, because you speak English. And so the way speaking English tricks the very European people, like a peacock would, or a bowerbird taking blue by speaking the very English language and saying, I have a mind like you, therefore I'm no different, and this is how an English person would speak. It's kind of like if a Congolese, woman started speaking French, and she said she's French and she's no different from any other French woman. And the problem is, no, she's Congolese, and she's just speaking French to trick other French people that they're no different from each other, when really it's just an equity bait and switch, so she can reap the benefits and keep her identity and maybe take some eugenics while other whitey is kicked out. And it's very difficult for most white people to understand this.
Well, and I would say it's probably impossible for the most part, because it's just it's not in the common conversation, these type of concepts of what we're really, there's no real contextualization that really exists out there for us to kind of really talk about it. I think that,
these really are the same people that worship Plato and Socrates like Jesus Christ. So if you have this kind of adultery other than God, thinking that Plato was the king of white people, then you're going to be having this Jewish complex where you see all non-whites good unless they bow down to your own Jewish god of Plato, pretty much.
Well, and what do you do in that situation? Do you look for some recent past of what it meant to be a admixture European back in Europe or in America and try to hang on to that, or do you look at who's succeeding, which is,
Well,
I
that's the thing.
suppose you would say
White
the Jews or
nationalism.
whatever.
The problem with white nationalism is that it requires admixture European people to get along, no matter what their background is. So if you're French, German, Irish, talking to a Hungarian, Polish person, it doesn't matter. You're all white, so we all belong to the same nationalism. White nationalism doesn't guarantee the success of ethnic nationalism. If white
Right.
nationalists see that French nationalism are succeeding, white nationalists would not support them. They would try to tear them down, contrary to any claim of ethno-nationalism, go to your own room. Because white nationalists, once they see that French nationalists are successful, mimesis kicks in, and then whites are moving to France because this is based in red-pilled French people with no blacks around, and then those very admixture people start to dilute those pure French people or try to assimilate in French society. The problem is you create more compounding downs of half French people. That's kind of just like a Hispanicization, just like what's happening in the United States. You get rid of the Anglo-Protestant and Jewish stock in favor of a Eurasian mix, a half white, half black mix, and pretty much more rival groups. And that's a problem, is then the state who is French or Anglos will have to create a program of neo-Malthusianism to try to say, stop having children, stay in your lineage, kill off any potential rivals. And white nationalists would probably do that if they saw a rival nationalist party come into power. That's the problem. There's usually these propaganda pieces that tell you that white nationalists and black nationalists are going to get along just fine only if they stay in their own neighborhoods and don't tread on each other, which is, of course, a libertarian value. Now, of course, if the black nationalists were to ever get power, white nationalists call them the enemies by Jews or some scapegoat like that, and that can be an issue.
And the reality is, just to take it back to the beginning of the conversation, and I might lose signal in a second. If I do, I'll be right back. But back to the personal battles that we have to go through in the reproduction game or the getting married and career game and the situation with women that we're stuck in. I mean, until men really start having some sort of bond and empathy, which does exist in some parts of the world to some degree, but I think on a larger scale, it's kind of unfortunately not as, it obviously is not as strong as it appears to be in the grand scheme. Whatever this system is definitely liberalizing the world and women specifically at a rapid rate. So, but I think that we have to be honest with ourselves that that men have got to start supporting each other, not in like a men's rights activist type of way, but to prepare for the fact that you're very likely to get fucked up in a relationship or a marriage or a career or whatever, and you're just going to have to like really do some really hard shit to mitigate that, unless you are an Andrew Tate and all that. And again, Andrew Tate's probably owned and controlled by someone, so he's kind of a front person for a larger organization. So
Right, that's the problem, because if we were to follow Andrew Tate's words verbatim, other than his useful comical stuff, society would be under collapse. If the truth was male solipsism and women are inherently evil, it's not only reactionary, but it redoes what white men have tried to build up to improve the world as a whole. I don't think improving the world is transhumanism, but it showed you that white men are so benevolent, caring, altruistic, whatever, that they gave their white women the power to act like them, right? But only then for it, like a Frankenstein monster, to kill them. And to now shun that away and assume it never was there is this Africanization and result back to primitive violence, which is a problem. And again, I think... yeah.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, I don't want to derail what you're saying, but I mean, there's so many little... let me tell a very short true crime story that I just heard. So there's some people from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, working for some, Protestant church of some sort, right? And they were missionaries over in Angola, Africa, right? And the wife and the husband are living over there for like I don't know, 3 or 6 years, something like that, quite a while, right? And 5 kids, and they're living obviously all around Angolans, right? Now, and I don't really believe that this story is totally true, but the story as it's told is something to the effect of that this woman was, having a relationship with a 24-year-old Angolan man, and said that she would pay him and his friends 50,000 US dollars to kill her husband for her, so they could, live happily ever after, or something to that effect, right? Now, I can't remember exactly where I was going with the story, but the point is, like, it's just funny because this is kind of like the white mindset, the white Christian mindset of like, well, let's just go around the world and be good people and bring the good word of, Platonic Christian ideals to the whole world, right? And how many stories like that have gone on throughout history that way, or with men, basically raping and pillaging allegedly, for when they're conquering the rest of the world or whatever. I mean, it's a very bizarre, like, I think really kind of what you're saying is like liberalism is this kind of like weird abomination of Christian
Colonizing.
ideals. Well, yeah, colonizing and Christian ideals of like everybody's an individual, and just kind of like saying, well, I should be able to trust that my wife has the same exact thought processes and, whatever that I do, because she's a human just like I am, right? But it doesn't account for any sort of differences that anybody else has, or points of view, or, evils that people harbor or whatever. It's kind of this weird, you know,
Mhm.
I mean, I hate to say it, but it's kind of a weird retardation almost, where it's like it just totally
But here's the
rejects
thing: I
what's
don't
going on.
think the answer is believing that only white women have that power, because again, it was white men out of their own patriarchal influence telling any women, not just white women, but any women they were subjected under their colonialism, to act that way. So if white men went to Africa, they would do the African women and teach. If they went to Asia, they would do it to the Asian. India, to India, right? White nationalists tend to slip on themselves when they think, well, I can't get with a non-white woman because they don't have my homosexual capacity to think like a man. So therefore, I would be better off with a white woman because she can think like me. And that's an aesthetic problem. They seemingly, you might as well justify homosexuality with that case, because that's how gay people think about women. They think women do not have the capacity to have a connection of philios, the love of wisdom. Even Plato, talking to Alcibiades, who are both gay, said the same thing. And that's a problem of homo nationalism, is that if you were to take the genius of the transhumanist soul of idealism to its core, then everybody would be gay and not having children. And that, but the problem is we're still animals. We're still wired to biologically reproduce with the opposite sex, and we find boobs and butt and hips attractive. And so it's not that it's an object to have sex with and to put away, it's to embrace it, to understand there's a man and a woman in a place, just like how birds and sharks and any other animals get along. The issue is how we're so intelligent how to control that. Women will always think different than men. It's just how the patriarchy needs to come back in power and to make sure it distributes sound justice and truth to the matter, not just this irrationalism of I just like the color blue and I want to hang with blue colored people. It just doesn't work like that, because it goes back to the libertarian mindset between that stuff and people are the same thing.
Well, and I guess, here's the real question: what could we do? And again, I think you and I have our own answers from, ourselves, but I guess, and we're still working it out, because we're not dead yet, and we'll probably be working it out until we are dead. Of like, what exactly are we to do in this situation, right? And there's not going to be an easy answer, I can tell you that. But definitely the AXA thing is an answer to it. Is it the ultimate answer? It's only time will tell. But I think that what I'm trying to say is that what is the kind of solution for the gynocracy that we're in, at least like on an actionable level? Like if you were to give a message out to, I mean, I guess men of good moral standing, or people like us who are kind of admixture Europeans trying to figure out like, what are we going to do? I mean, taking on other people's women, I think, is definitely an answer to some degree.
That's certainly what other non-white men are doing. Indian men are doing it. Black men are doing it. There's just a different RK selective strategy about it. And that's the problem. If white men believe they're Jews and they can't go out of the clan and have to date another Polish, Austrian, Hungarian mix of sorts with no real chances of community, because again, if everybody's an individual, you have no right to community. Everybody's doing their own thing. There's just going to be a boiling point, as Emil Durkheim would say, until you commit suicide because there's no clan anymore. And here's the funny part. People are better with non-white egalitarian malaises. In other words, because everyone hates being white, which the liberals have translated into lame, conformist, and, middle class, being Asian as a malaise is now considered cosmopolitan, intelligent, and diverse. Just like how they think what black is, even though black is kind of not wanted because they think black is a type of not African attitude, but just an individual who's more down to earth or something. But the point in being is if anybody had a chance, a Malays Asian society would always trump a Malays white society, simply because it goes beyond liberalism and it goes back to pagan roots of identity. And that is something what the individual is missing, because the individual can choose an identity. When you're Asian, you're Asian. You can't not unchoose an Asian society. So if everybody becomes half Asian, then everybody would have some Immanuel Kant ideal of duty where they cannot betray their Asian background because they have a genetic temperament to believe in a clan. And I think that ultimately is what's happening under multiculturalism, is that there's no libertarian diversity of Kurds in Nashville's or, Germans in Korea. What's happening is that everybody's becoming Asian, and with some white men acting white. But nobody wants to be white because that's evil and racist. So if everybody's Asian, everybody has.
And let's be honest, it kind of sucks because, the best case scenario I would say is like, the thought experiment I like to play with is like, well, maybe they're being anti-white because they actually are pro-white, and they need to lower everybody's defenses as they kind of actually implement white supremacy or something like that. I mean, like, I don't think that's actually happening.
But anti-white because they want German, French, and Irish people to have an identity from ways of not. Correct.
Interesting. See, and again, like the thing is like, is that because of a lack of good strategy in the beginning, or has that been kind of like, how do we conquer the world and conquer our greatest threat and use them to our benefit simultaneously, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of, again, I think there was a post-scarcity mindset by the boomer generation, who was all admixture European people, because admixture European people came from Anglos getting with Italian women and German women. So they would lose their Italianness and Germanness to create the normal white Americana 3 generations in, which we're now. Hypothetically, those were the Asian women of 100 years ago, was marrying a pure Italian or German woman as an Anglo guy. You didn't have to deal with other Anglo women because that belonged to the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, and the Rockefellers. The middle class had purebred German, Irish, whatever women with their own languages. 3 generations in, now we could say today is being with a Chinese, a Korean, a Japanese, or a Southeast Asian. That, or even some extents with J.D. Vance getting with a Hindu, which is very hard to get with. But that's the whole point right now, is that we're seeing another malaise breakdown because there's no more white women anymore, because white women don't see themselves as women to any ethnicity. They see themselves as women of the world. Well, then women just become poker chips for other non-white men to exert their patriarchy, and they can get 1 point of being half white to increase their eugenics pool and to get more power under liberal capitalism. It's very simple to understand. And it increases their intelligence and a sense of aesthetics.
And so, and I guess it comes back to, again, you know, how are we to approach the situation where we kind of, at least in some sense, major sense, are lacking, you know, executive authority in our own home and our own governments, et cetera. You know, how do we kind of mitigate this problem? You know, and I think that's
Unfortunately, I have to go right now, but I'll talk to you later.
no problem.